Hello and welcome to my second Russian history quiz. There'll be 10 questions, are based on chapter 1 of the textbook, so it's kind of the origins of the February Revolution. There are also 10 general knowledge questions this week, but I've done those as a separate video to stop me having to record the general questions multiple times. If you are watching this, you may of course also be interested in the Tudor history videos that I'm doing to help you revise the Tudor option as well. Anyway, let's get started with question 1. Question 1 is, when did the Romanovs, or the Romanov dynasty, first come to power in Russia? So when did the first Romanov become Tsar of Russia? In what year? And that is question 1. Question 2. Which Tsar was assassinated in 1881? So it's the grandfather of Nicholas II, is your clue. He was assassinated in 1881. That had an impact on his son and grandson's approach to reform. So that was question 2. Question 3. Who murdered the notorious Rasputin in December 1916? So question 3, who murdered Rasputin? Question 4, what was the site of a huge defeat of Russian forces in East Prussia, i.e. in Germany, in August 1914, and it resulted in 300,000 Russian casualties. That's men either killed or wounded, or captured, I think. So a huge defeat. So the massive defeat suffered by the Russians right at the beginning of the First World War in East Prussia in August of 1914. That's question 4. Question 5. What was the name of the operation of June 1916 that aimed to push westwards from the Ukraine through the Austro-Hungarian lines? So it's a military operation, June 1916, an attempt to break through the Austro-Hungarian lines, which were weaker than the German lines. What was the name of that operation or offensive? Of June 1916. Okay, question 6. Who became the leader of Zemgor when it was first established in 1915? That's kind of a national association of local governments. Who became the leader of Zemgor when it was first established in 1915? I'll give you a clue. He went on to become the first chairman of the provisional government, or the first prime minister of Russia following the February Revolution. So that was question 6. Question 7. What did the Progressive Bloc in the Duma call for in August 1915? So they called on the Tsar to do something. So what was that? So question 7, the call from the Progressive Bloc to the Tsar in August 1915. What did they want the Tsar to do at that stage? Okay, let's move on to question 8. What decision did the Tsar make in September 1916? What decision did the Tsar make in September 1916? Question 9. Who was the president of the Fourth Duma? Who was the president of the Fourth Duma? sent a warning to Nicholas II. The capital was becoming ungovernable a few days before the Tsar was forced to abdicate, which he dismissed. So that was question 9, the President of the Fourth Duma. Question 10, what two acute problems were the populations of Russian cities, and in particular Petrograd, Moscow, suffering from by 1916, certainly by early 1917. So the two acute problems affecting the populations of Moscow, Petrograd and other major cities. I've just realised I've written 12 questions this week, not 10. So, question 11. Who, as leader of the Octoberist Party, engaged in talks with senior army officers in 1916 about a possible coup d'etat to force Nicholas's abdication? So just a few months before the February Revolution. So who was the leader of the Octoberist Party? He engaged in talks with senior army officers, sounding them out over the possibility of forcing Nicholas to abdicate. What was his name? So that was question 11. And then finally, question 12. Roughly, how many followers did Lenin have in Russia at the beginning of 1917? So, or even February 1917, at the time of the February Revolution, roughly how many Bolsheviks were there in Russia? And I'll give you a clue, it's a surprisingly small number. Okay, so 12 questions, all done. If you need some more time, pause the video because I'm now going to run through the answers. Okay, so question 1, when did the Romanov dynasty first come to power? That was in 1613. You may recall that Nicholas II celebrated the tercentenary of the Romanov dynasty in 1913. So that means they came to power in 1613. The Tsar, who was assassinated in 1881, that's question 2, that was Tsar Alexander II. He begun carrying out some reforms, but for his pains was assassinated, and his son and grandson both decided that reform was a really bad idea in consequence. And question 3, who murdered Rasputin in December 1916? And had some difficulty, tried to poison him, shot him, chucked him in the river. That was Prince Yusupov. So Prince Yusupov, he was the leader of the plot, at least, to murder Rasputin. Question 4, the site of the huge Russian defeat in East Prussia in August 1914 with 300,000 casualties. That was the Battle of Tannenberg. So Tannenberg is the answer to question 4. Question 5, the military operation of June 1916, an attempt to break through the Austro-Hungarian lines rather than the German lines. That was the Brusilov offensive. It worked fairly well until the Austro-Hungarians were reinforced by the Germans. Question 6, the leader of Zemgor and later the first chairman of the provisional government was Prince Georgy Yevgenovich Lvov, or Prince Lvov, as he's more often referred to. So that's question 6. Question 7, the Progressive Bloc called in August 1915, they called on the Tsar to form or to establish a government of public confidence, by which of course they meant a government formed from themselves. The Tsar unwisely turned them down, question 8, the decision he took in September 1916 was to take on the role of Commander-in-Chief of the Russian Army and Navy, thus, of course, totally associating himself with the failing war effort. Question 9, the president of the Fourth Duma, who tried to, at the last minute, to warn the Tsar of the dire state of things in Petrograd, was Mikhail Rodzianko. So Rodzianko, the answer to question 9. Question 10, the two acute problems facing Moscow, Petrograd and other leading industrial cities was hunger, following the collapse of the railway system and the poor harvests, as many peasants have been conscripted. That caused widespread hunger, and those shortages it also caused factories to shut down as well, so widespread unemployment. So I was looking for hunger and unemployment for question 10. Question 11, the leader of the Octoberist Party, who had engaged in talks with army officers with a view to forcing Nicholas to abdicate, was Alexander Guchkov. So Guchkov was the leader of the Octoberist Party. And then finally, roughly how many Bolsheviks were there in Russia at the beginning of 1917? Well, around about 10,000. So a relatively small number. The very small political party, they only grew rapidly really in the summer of 1917, did not play a role very much in the events of the February Revolution. And those Bolsheviks who did play a role were very much at the grassroots level. Okay, that concludes the 12 questions this week for Russian history. Next week we'll be looking at the February Revolution, so get revising for that one. And don't forget, I have done a general knowledge quiz just for fun, and that's now on a separate playlist.